And then here he's in the 90s, kind of got some of his juice back, got some of his moxie, kind of joking around a lot, looking back on that time, saying, yeah, it's fine. I was pretty good. Yeah, I'm doing all right now. I'm like most Beatles fans, so I am listening to the music all the time. I'm watching the movies and watching the videos, and I'm also listening to the interviews. And just recently, I was listening to a few Paul McCartney interviews. I was just randomly letting them play. And there were these 3 separate ones from 82 in the mid 90s and one from just a few years ago. So different decades, different Paul McCartneys. In each one, he was looking back, not exactly on the same subject, but it was just what he was doing. And I think that just because they were right next to each other, it made something really clear, made something kind of stand out to me in each one of them. Like for instance, like the 1982 one, where he was pretty relaxed that day. The interviewer was doing a pretty good job. And, he didn't really have that wall up like he always does. He wasn't being really jokey. He was just being pretty frank, pretty relaxed. He wasn't really elaborating too much, but he was being a little bit vulnerable and a little bit less opaque. We could kind of see some of his processes here. And, he was being very, kind of straightforward. And it looked to me, because this was 1982, looked to me like he was really just still kind of processing what was going on in 1980, because the interview was talking to him about the Japanese bust that landed him in jail and that potentially could have landed him there for many years. And Paul was saying, I don't know what I was doing, because all of a sudden I start to think about what's going to happen to my family. This most important thing in my life, what's going to happen to my family? And I just let this happen to me. And then he's talking about how, Wings all was dissolving and how it was always going to be difficult anyway to replace the Beatles, and he's starting talking about how tight they were back then. And he goes back to the very early days and tells that, Beatles sandwich story in the back of the van, where Mal has to break out that front window with the rock. He tells that story. And then he says something about, how painful it was, the breakup. He talks about that. That was like the worst thing that he'd ever experienced. Like it was like a divorce, and all the money and everything. He was just talking to it like that. It's just like really bad. And he said, I just don't even want to think about that. I just put that away. I can't think about it. And I don't blame him, because he had to move on. He had a family, and he had a new life, and he had to restart. He had to rebuild from the ground up. And he did a really good job. But that was what was so amazing about that other one, the one from the 90s, from about maybe 12, 13, 14 years later, where Paul is looking back again, but this time Paul is looking back on his own days in the 70s. He's finally, looking at the 70s. I guess that Paul was unlocking a little bit the 70s there in that 82 interview. Maybe he unlocked a little bit more in the 80s. So finally here in the 90s, he's looking back and kind of admitting in this interview, yeah, I actually did look back, and I talked to some people, and they kind of tell me that I did okay. I did all right in the 70s, and I did some okay stuff in the 80s too. Very, very interesting, because again, he's kind of jokey, but he's also kind of serious there. And you can tell that, he's obviously got an ego like they all do. He's got some insecurities, because again, in that first interview, he talks about his insecurities, because again, that was a 1982 interview, so he's probably dealing with some stuff. Again, they're artists. You're always going to be insecure. And just like when he was talking about in 1982 interview, he's talking to Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones says, hey man, you just can't think about your stuff. You just don't even edit it. Don't worry about it. Don't judge it. Just put it out there and don't worry about it. And that was very reassuring to Paul. And I'm sure that Paul already knew that. Paul already knew that that's what you do as an artist. You just do what feels right to you, because that's what they did when he was in the Beatles. They would just, whatever sounded good, whatever felt good, whatever seemed good, Just put it out there. It doesn't matter. And here we are picking everything apart. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't have to mean anything. Even current days, it doesn't have to mean anything. And Paul even says it. Hey, it doesn't mean anything. I just liked how that sounded. So, and here I am picking everything apart. I don't know if I'm really picking it apart. I just am making some observations here that, Paul was looking back on everything and discovering, thankfully and happily, I'm like happy for him that he's just, unlocking the 70s and realizing how great he was. So I'm glad that happened for him because, again, in that more contemporary interview, he's allowing himself to look back on the relationship with John. And again, like in the 82 interview, he referred to all that as a divorce. But in the more contemporary one, he's got more of a positive spin. Okay, it's Paul. It's current day Paul, where Paul is telling the stories. Paul has sorted everything out. He knows he's pretty good. He's such a blessing. We love Paul. I mean, he can just do whatever he wants to do, and I'm absolutely fine with that. But now he went back and he's referring to John, and that was like a marriage. And that bond was like a marriage. I mean, he did not go into detail or anything. He just referred to it like that. So not a big deal. Something he said probably time and time again. Just like in that 90s interview where he probably said, hey, I looked back and I kind of doubted myself. Not sure he said that time and time again. And again, in the 82 interview where he said, hey, I just blocked everything out. It was awful. It was the worst time. He said that time and time again. It's just that and again, we hear these things, but do we really believe it? That Paul was really hurt that bad? Do we believe it that Paul really doubted himself? Do we believe the closeness of the Beatles? Do we believe that? Or do we doubt that? I mean, because again, Paul must have doubts. Paul obviously had doubts. But here we are like not believing Paul, but putting them all together like that. Just really, really telling that, yeah, Paul really had those insecurities. And he's like just kind of dealing with, the breakup of the Beatles. He's not going to have that again. It's like all of his hopes and dreams out the window. I can't trust anybody. I thought they were my friends. What does everybody think of me? Everybody hates me now. So I got to lock all that away. The 70s just didn't happen. I didn't do all that good stuff. But he was talking about Linda and how he didn't even think about it. He said, yeah, there's probably better musicians, but I don't care about that. I wanted Linda with me. So that worked out pretty good. That was a good choice, Paul. Because I'm sure that Linda, I don't know, but as a woman, I mean, you're sitting there and she seems pretty intelligent, emotionally intelligent and savvy and down to earth. She knows her man. She probably could tell what was going on. Hey, you got it, whatever you want. I don't care. I'm up there on stage. I know that, why you have me here. I don't have to be the best musician, but I can be the best me. I can be your best medicine. And I'm here for you because that is what Paul needs. Paul needed that partner, in life, in love, in work, in music. And that was what Linda was. And, he didn't go on and on about that. But obviously that's what he meant. That's what he wanted. And she was that. And she said, okay, I'm here for that. And then obviously after a while, didn't need her on stage. Looks like, in the 80s and the 90s, he was making his way. He was getting back in his head that, hey, I do okay. I'm just fine. He was kind of getting back with his buddies again, with Ringo. Not so much with George, but, a little bit now and then. In the 90s, he was more with George. But again, that's another story. It was just very beautiful for me to see, like, the real Paul. And again, this time, even me, like, believe him. That, yeah, he was really going through some stuff. And, we shouldn't just, like, brush that stuff off, how hard it is for them to be that star, to be under a microscope. To, have everybody wanting something from him. So I don't blame Ringo for not wanting to sign things anymore because, look what he's doing. We should be pleased. We should be happy. And again, look at Paul. Look at what he's doing. He's doing everything. He's given us everything. And it was so interesting speaking that in that same interview, the 82 interview, the guy goes, hey, when do you think you're going to stop? I mean, they always asked him back when they were the Beatles, like, when is the Beatle break? When is it bubble burst? Okay. What are you going to do when the bubble bursts? Well, Paul is basically, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing. Like when I'm 100 years old, I might be singing more ballads and I'll probably sing kind of croaky. And he did an imitation of himself, like, from 40 years into the future, or like 60 years in the future, because he was right around 40 then. So it's just a beautiful interview, because again, you look back on all that, and there's just something special about Paul when he opens up like that, when you can see a little bit more of him, the warmth, the depth there, the vulnerability, the real him. And again, I don't blame him for keeping it covered up, for protecting it. It's valuable, So, and I want him to stay around as long as he can. So, Paul, do whatever you got to do to protect yourself. Tell me all the stories you want to tell me about John and George and Ringo, Linda, Nancy, everybody. Just tell me those stories over and over again. I think we're all here for it. I know I am. Thank you so much for being here. Listen to me talk about Paul. I think I'm going to go and watch those interviews again because they were just great. So thanks again, and until next time, peace and love one another. And then, of course, as he's talking about John, he talks about, what happened in December of 1980 when they lost John. And he says, I really wish I could have talked to him the night before. That's what I wish. And so that way we could have put everything right. So there's a hint there that maybe, not everything was right. And of course, it's not going to be right. Of course, there's a lot more to say. There's always a lot more to say. You're never really ready for that. But he did back up a little bit and say, yeah, I think we put most everything okay. And me and Yoko, we're doing okay now. We're talking.